Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry.
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 188 with Natasha Calder, author of the haunting and dystopian Whether Violent or Natural. We chat about her writing process and how every book is different, what makes an exciting dystopian story, and we talk about Natasha's previous experience working in collaboration with another author. It's a fun chat. Before we get to that, a very quick catch up from me. And with these episodes coming so thick and fast at the minute, there's not too much to update you on since last week. Safe Hands is back out in the world again, and as it's been less than 2 weeks and we're currently deluged with bank holidays here in the UK, my inbox has been unsurprisingly silent. I've continued to flesh out ideas for the follow-up, and what started as some fuzzy, blurred world and story is now slowly coming into focus. Safe Hands had 2 POV characters, aside from a very brief chapter later on in the novel, and the new book seems to organically have expanded to 3 POV characters, which is a bit of a development, and I think that'll just give me the opportunity to see the world from the eyes of Mickey's son, Liam, who is actually the main narrative engine for this new book. Funnily enough, in today's interview, which was recorded a few weeks ago now, I talk about my desire to plan instead of flying by the seat of my pants all the time, as well as the fact that I always seem to need to write some initial words before I even start to think about properly mapping out the story. Well, so far, that's something I've managed to resist. Little snippets of dialogue are appearing in my notes, and I'm honing down certain plot points and backstory ideas, but I want to hold off on the actual writing for as long as I can. Let's call it foreplay. Actually, apologies if you're eating or something like that, and that's probably the last thing you want to think about. But aside from working on that, my day job in video production is very busy at the minute. I did get to do some script writing for a corporate client recently, and I got to direct the shoot as well, which, as with any corporate project, is always a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, you try being moderately humorous about a series of sales meetings whilst including all the necessary jargon and keeping the CEO of the company happy. It's a challenge, to say the least. And that's before you get to the shoot, where many of the cast aren't even actors, but instead they're employees of the business, press-ganged into performing some skit their boss has foisted upon them. And if there are any fans of like Ricky Gervais' show Extras, you'll appreciate there are many times I struggled to remain patient or not to laugh at the wrong moment. Still, it's all fuel for my creative engine and will no doubt show up in my writing at some point. Next week I'm out of the country doing what we call an on-site edit, basically me sitting in a windowless room somewhere in a huge conference building, editing footage from a multi-day conference and trying to make it look exciting and dynamic, with a highlights film that gets played out at the end. There'll be long days, but I'm hoping I can at least keep my book outline alive by spending a few minutes on it each day. I realise, as I say that all this stuff, that it just sounds like one big moan, and let's be honest, it is a little bit. But I also mention it as a reminder that we all have to fit writing around the rest of our lives, our day jobs if we've got them, but also our family, our friends, and all the other things that real life tends to throw at us. It's also what makes our writing what it is. All of these real life experiences, our hopes, dreams, worries, frustrations, whatever, feed into what we do, and it gives us our unique perspective, I think. And with that, I'll bring my rant to an end and ask you, how do you fit your writing around everything else? What have you got going on? How do you make it work? I'd love to hear all about that, so do get in touch. And you can do that by emailing wayne@waynekellyWrites.com or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up. And you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows, events, workshops and anything else that's going on. Right. Let's get to today's chat with Natasha Calder. So Natasha is a graduate of Clarion West 2018 and her work has previously appeared in The Stinging Fly, Lackingtons and Curiosities, amongst others. She's one half of Calder Shujak, whose first book, The Offset, was released in September 2021 by Angry Robot. And now her solo author debut, Whether Violent or Natural, is released in the UK on May the 11th. So enjoy the chat and I'll pop back at the end to wrap things up.
Joined up writing.
Okay, Natasha, thanks so much for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you start off just by giving us a sense of where you're speaking from and tell us how things are going at the minute?
Hi, Wayne. Thanks for having me. I am speaking from Durham in the northeast of England. I'm currently sitting in what is definitely my favourite room of the house we're renting. I'm surrounded by Tintin posters and bookshelves full of graphic novels.
Nice.
It is raining heavily outside, and at the time of recording, we're about 1 month away from the publication of my solo novel. So, yes, I'm not feeling too stressed just yet.
No, it's still still far enough away that you can sort of be excited without too many of the nerves kicking in.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why don't you tell us about that solo debut, Whether Violent or Natural? Tell us about that.
Sure. So I never really got my elevator pitch down for this. I tended, when people asked, just to say, oh, it's about antimicrobial resistance, but really it's about a couple of weirdos on an island. So let me just be slightly awful and read from the blurb.
That's all right. That's good. That's fine.
Okay, so on a remote island, far from the chaos that has engulfed the mainland, Kit and Creven eke out an existence. Amidst the ruins of a collapsing castle, they spend their days in an underground bunker packed with emergency stores, venturing out only at night. They are safe. One evening, however, a woman washes ashore, nearly drowned. Creven wants to keep her alive, but Kit isn't so sure. As the crisis brought about by the appearance of the drowned woman starts to consume them, the fictions of their shared existence crumble and the truth begins to emerge. So there you go. That's a bit more of a taste.
Yeah, brilliant. Sounds very atmospheric and dystopian, suitably dystopian. So do you kind of remember what the initial inspiration was? Was there kind of a sort of a jumping off point for you, or was it just lots of ideas coalescing?
Yes, I mean, I started a million miles from where I ended up. And sort of to explain, I have to go slightly back before the beginning, which is, so this is my first solo book, but before that I co-wrote a book with a friend. It's called The Offset, and it's published under the name Calder Shujak, which is our surnames combined, and it's published with an indie press called Angry Robot. Anyway, so this must have been back in 2019, and we'd sort of got ourselves into an odd position where we'd sent a version of that book to an agent who requested that we rewrite it for him, which we did. We'd set this artificial deadline and a week out from which we found ourselves looking at what we had and realizing it wasn't really working. So there was this hell week that involved breaking down the a 90,000 word manuscript into its sort of 30,000 words but bare bones, and then building it up to another 60,000 word manuscript that was totally different in tone and atmosphere to what we had before.
Sounds painful.
It was incredibly painful, and looking back on it, extremely useful, because it's this sort of pressure cooker environment and you learn a hell of a lot from it. But afterwards, as you can probably understand, I remember feeling sort of not drained necessarily, but sort of completely steamrolled by that process. So after that, I mean, the agent didn't end up taking it, but we went out on submission and landed the agent that we're both still with today. So that all worked out for the best. But sort of creatively after that, I was casting around for something to work on, really sort of floored by that experience and not knowing what to do. Yeah. And a writer friend of mine sort of suggested starting with some sort of exercise, rewrite something that you like. And I picked something esoteric. I think it was Sigurd the Volsung by William Morris, and I started trying to do a retelling of that and ended up sort of creating this horrible, sprawling fantasy world, and everything about it was pedestrian, and I hated it, and it sort of transformed from that thing to something slightly based on the dynamics of Prize of Lions, where they kick out the male cubs once they reach a certain age. And I don't know, it was odd. It was thoroughly odd, and it was completely at once boring and sprawling and outside of my control. So I started narrowing it down and down to the elements that I did like, which were sort of the more survival aspects. Characters in isolated places, struggling to get by, and I narrowed it down and down until I was working with elements that I felt comfortable doing, still being, you know, a relatively early stage of my career and my abilities. So I ended up really just with 2 characters in a very enclosed space, and then I started feeding into it past interest that I actually have about antimicrobial resistance, which is something I've been interested in for a while, and I could just feed it into that, and suddenly everything started, well, not quite. Things didn't start to work quite just then. I started building sort of a plot and a world, and things seemed to be coming together. But there was some point, and this is where there's sort of a slightly magic moment where I can't say exactly what happened, but it felt like some sort of barrier broke down. And then my protagonist, Kit, was on the other side saying, Jesus, what took you so long? And then everything kind of flowed from there, and it was much easier from that point on. And I can only rationalize it as thinking that I must have pressed so much down into my subconscious that I very suddenly hit a point where I could write instinctively, having done all that agonizing and hard graft beforehand.
Yeah. And I mean, as you say, I know it's relatively early on in your career, but do you think that kind of sums up your process to a certain extent? Is that kind of how you have to work? You know, you start off with this amorphous kind of big ideas kind of thing, and then you kind of have to whittle that down through lots of work. Or do you think going forward you'll try a different approach, or are you fairly open?
I had hoped at the time of doing that I'd hit upon the way for me to write
Yeah.
a novel, sort of going through this horrible process and then finally latching onto a voice that says it's the way forward. But what I'm working on now it's nothing like that at all, in a slightly dispiriting way. It's a different, probably equally inefficient process, but bearing otherwise very few similarities to the one for whether violent or natural.
So it's just your process, and that's that. Why question it too much?
There is that. I suppose there's no wrong way, there's no right way. And reassuringly, I think it must be in the introduction to American Gods, I think Neil Gaiman describes in that the feeling that he'd hit upon the way of writing a novel, which was that he wouldn't cut his hair and he'd write a chapter and then he'd write this sort of short story that gets inserted afterwards, and then discovering at the end of it that he'd only worked out how to write that novel and not in fact all novels.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think everybody's different anyway, and I don't think there is. I think the right way is whichever way works for you at that particular time.
Exactly. Do you find yourself switching process between projects?
I do. Like anything, it's like I've always wanted to, and even now I'm going through this phase where I really envy authors that can plan everything to the nth degree, and then just go hell for leather with the writing, because I can write fairly quickly, as in I can get the words down relatively quickly, and when I'm in the flow and all that kind of thing. But I don't know whether you're the same, but I'll find, because a lot of the time I just kind of go off by the seat of my pants and I'm writing a character or a situation that I like or whatever, and then there comes a point where it's like, yeah, but where are we going with this? where you know, and I sort of have to stop and I have to take stock, and then I always end up sort of planning sort of ahead anyway. But I always think to myself, why not do all that hard work at the beginning before you start the writing? But like you, I don't know why we try and do this to ourselves. I think we just tie ourselves up in knots when we should probably just, you know, that's the way that we do it and that's how it is. So we should probably just accept it. And
absolutely. And I don't know about you, but also, I mean, I am also very envious of writers who can outline. I think I was told that Connie Willis outlines her novels and then she just picks the bit that she most feels like writing that day and writes it, and it all slots together at the end. And wow, I'd love to have that as a process. But I don't know about you. Anytime I've tried actually outlining something sort of thoroughly, plotted
Mm,
out every scene
mm.
and chapter, it's really killed it for me.
Yeah, it
Um,
does me. I found that I was thinking about this today, funnily enough. I think for me, I think I am going to try to do more of the planning and all that
yeah,
kind of thing and outlining. But I think the thing that I'm not going to stop, that I just seem to have to do, is I have to at least part write my way into it. I have to sort of, even if it's just the first, whatever, 10,000 words or something, so that I can get a sense of who the character or characters are, what style it's in, what, a little bit about the world. I have to know that it's somewhere I want to spend some time, I think, and then I can do
exactly
it.
right.
But I think to go from like just, blank page and it does, for me, it just doesn't work, because like you say, something's great. You think, oh yeah, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then you start writing, and you're like, I absolutely hate this person or this situation I've created.
Yeah, exactly. So I find it much the same, and I think it's really important. Again, if you're someone like us and that's what works for you, to stick with it and to maintain the level of excitement. I mean, I definitely write for the same reason that I read, which is because I want to run away into a book. And if I'm not enjoying what I'm writing, then what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. So your first novel that you mentioned, well, the one that was co-written was The
Yeah.
Offset, and that also explored dystopian themes. So what draws you to this genre, or at least what's drawn you to this genre for the first couple of books, do you think?
Um, it's a good question. I think some of it is, if you're looking at a future setting. I mean, a future setting is very attractive because you get to have total control over the world
Yeah,
of the book without it being a fantasy land where you have to completely start from scratch.
yeah,
Um, so I think there's that side of it. And then the tendency for things to skew more darkly, I suppose, is a reflection of contemporary issues that's sort of
no,
unavoidable.
the world's
No,
great.
isn't it? Oh, sorry, I missed that. I must be reading the wrong newspapers. Um, and I'm sure that some of it, and science fiction. I'm not sure if I should be calling this science fiction. I don't think the publisher wants to call it science fiction, but
There are
it
elements of
does
it.
tend to
Yeah,
be slightly alarmist.
yeah,
And that is the bread and butter of saying, okay, well, let me take this idea to its logical conclusion, or one possible logical conclusion, and it's going to be much more exciting for everyone if it's dark and twisted, and if it's the worst possible things, then we can warn you all about it. So there's that side of it, and then there's also, I suppose, was it who wrote about the suburbs dreaming of violence? So I can't remember who that quote is from, but in addition to our worlds being quite the contemporary world being full of challenges and horrible things, I think there's a lot of boredom in everyday life,
yeah.
and people do dream of dramatic events and tragedies, and gosh, isn't it better that we explore it in fiction than taking it out on each other?
Yeah, I guess it's the same reason people watch horror films and ride
Yeah,
roller coasters.
exactly.
They want to be kind of shook up. So I'm really interested obviously in the fact that you co-wrote The Offset, because again, that's not something that you see that much. I know
No.
that there are a few co-writers and a few people that have collaborated on things. So how did you find that process? How did the mechanics of it actually work? Did you sort of take a chapter each, or did you say, I'm going to write this character and you're going to write that character? How did that work?
It varied quite a lot throughout the process of writing that book, because I think we probably had the original draft that we sent to an agent, then the one we'd hit upon before we did the complete rewrite that then landed us our final agent, final and current agent. And because of all those different forms, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what we did, because our process also changed throughout
Yeah,
those times as well. It certainly involved an awful lot of talking. Originally we were living in the same place, so I'd go over to my co-writer's house for dinner once a week, and we sort of talk through everything and take it a chapter at a time. And then
Sure.
after that, when I was living in Ireland and she was still living in the UK, we had to move that sort of all online. So we'd be working in Google Docs with WhatsApp open and chatting in the comments and then picking up the phone and speaking as well.
Yeah.
So it was really sort of about that and having a thorough, complete confidence in our ability to communicate and just keeping the lines open all the time, and sort of regardless of who wrote which bit, sort of passing it back and forth for edits so
Yeah.
often that it would get to the point where you couldn't say, oh, well, this sentence is mine and that sentence is
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not like anything I've done before, and not like anything I've done since either, but very interesting and really useful, particularly if you're at the start of your career, because you've got someone else going along with you through the publishing process, which is very helpful because you can push back on certain things. You can huddle together and be like, gosh, this is scary or not what I expected. And then the other thing I find really useful is it helps to remove an element of the second guessing that happens. I find that happens when I'm writing anyway, where you're sort of sitting with a blank page and wondering, is this even the story I should be writing? Once you've agreed something with your co-writer,
Yeah.
you've got that settled, you've got the target to write for. It's all been agreed between you, and you also have your audience right there. You're writing to please your co-writer, and everything becomes very discrete, manageable tasks because of that, and that's quite helpful too as an exercise.
Yeah, because I think most writers and people listening to this will probably agree that it's incredibly lonely, especially at the start of your career before you I think it's different once you've kind of got a deal or you're submitting and you've got an audience in, as much as you've got an agent or you've got an editor that you're working with or whatever, who's expecting the next draft or to see the results of the changes that you've made or whatever. But before that, you are very much, it's such a lonely thing, isn't it? You're doing it all on your own.
Yeah, it is. And I'm very happy in my own company. I can go for days at a time without seeing people. And actually, my husband's just gone to Germany for a month, and I love him and I miss him, and I'll be glad when he comes back. But I'm also delighted.
I know exactly what you're saying.
But you're right about that loneliness of when you're just at the beginning, because it's so desperate and you don't know if it can work, and so many of your hopes and dreams are pegged to it, and it's a really hard thing to talk about with other people, and when you do bring it up, some people understand it and others don't. So having another person with you who not merely gets it but is going through exactly the same things as you, there's a lot of comfort to be had from that.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go back a little bit. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how you actually came to writing in the first place? What's your earliest memory of writing?
My earliest memory of writing would have been sort of as a kid, a school-age kid. My twin and I, we wrote a play. I think it was about a mouse, or more specifically about a fox and a cat who were trying to win her affections in order to eat the mouse.
That's good.
And the school kindly let us put it on. And I remember, I think this is the only piece of feedback I actually remember word for word. She sort of sat us all down, and she was going to talk us through how we do rehearsals and stuff. And the piece of criticism she had on the play itself was, what I really like about this is that the stage directions are written correctly, which is amazing.
Yeah.
I love that so much. It's good to learn early on about damning with faint praise.
I've had, I've done it with, I've heard people say, I really like the font on this. This is really nice.
Brilliant. So that would be my earliest memory. And I'm sure from after that, there would have been an awful lot of horrible, tragic poetry sort of through that. But from early teenage years, I wasn't so much wanting to write as I was wanting to go to university and study English. That was the big drive. And I did that, and I got to university and I thought, oh brilliant. This is everything I hoped. I'll be an academic and that will be my life. This is my way to spend my life, with books. Somewhere along the way, though, I became quite disillusioned with academia. Some of it's about the job insecurity and the limited chances of getting employment, and some of it's about, I don't know, forgive me, but the slight circle jerk nature of four very educated persons sort of getting together to say, oh, well, yes, the divergence between the 75th line of this text in manuscript A versus manuscript B, all that learning for so little use seems a bit of a shame. So I did my master's, and after that I sort of stepped out of it and I went to work in digital marketing. And then I went to work in cybersecurity and became very, very unhappy. And I think it was possibly sort of that immense dissatisfaction, not merely going like, oh, is this all life is going to be, but also having sort of cut myself off from any meaningful relationship with books in any way that would have brought me back to writing. So I would have started very secretly working on short stories and things in sort of my mid to late 20s, and then I stumbled across an article on a writing workshop called Clarion West in the States. And I applied thinking, okay, I'll do this application the first time, and then, by the time it comes around again next year, I'll actually have something sensible to submit. But I got in the first time round, which was
great.
A surprise and a delight to me. And I took some time out of work to go to Seattle for 6 weeks and sit in a sorority house with 17 other genre writers. And we, submitted stories to each other every week and did crits. And that was an incredible experience.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience.
Real pressure cooker.
Yeah.
And sort of after that, I came back, and I think it was not immediately, but some months later, the validation of that. I did what you're not supposed to do, and I quit my job probably within about 6 months. And just to say, listen, if I'm going to give this a try, I'm going to give this a real try and put everything I have into it. And it worked out better than I was expecting.
But you went for it, and you mentioned the short stories there. I know you had some success with your short stories as well. Tell us a little bit about that. And do you still like to write short stories? Do you think that writing short stories, what do you think it taught you with regards writing a book?
I write short stories only very occasionally now. I have mixed feelings about it. I don't write them as often as perhaps I should, and that's partly because I don't read short stories as often as I should. They demand an awful lot from a reader, I think, without giving an awful lot in return. And there's really nowhere to hide in a short story. It has to be perfect to, in such a short space, convey sufficient journey and character. But it has been useful working on short stories in the past, not least anything where you get to practice your sentence level writing is useful. Anything where you get to work on a sort of distilled version of what ends up being used in a novel about character and plot is useful. And of course, there's, I think Ray Bradbury's advice to a graduating class of writers was write short stories. If you write a short story a week, you can write 52 in a year. I challenge you to write 52 bad short stories, but if you write a novel, you can write one in a year, and probably it'll be awful because it's your first. So that makes a lot of sense. But he was also speaking at a time where you could make a living off short stories, and that's kind of
gone
really
now,
not the case now. There are a couple of people who can do it, the Ted Changs and Kelly Links of the world, but they are next level, and I can't pretend to approach them.
And there's just not the same market that there used to be.
No.
Obviously, there used to be loads of literary magazines and other different other markets for it, but there's just not. They're not there now, are they? Unfortunately.
No, unfortunately.
So, how do you fit your writing around real life and all the rest of the stuff? Have you kind of got a set way of going about it? Do you write at a certain time of day, or do you look at word counts, or how does it work for you?
It depends on the project and the phase of the project that I'm in. For whether violent or natural, when I hit that, what I think of now as the home run, and sort of the voice of the protagonist came through, it was suddenly, even though I felt like a bit of a live wire, the process became very ordered. I'd sit down and write 2,000 words a day, and then I would stop, even if I was itching to write more, even if I spent the rest of the day sort of almost buzzing with the energy and the ideas for what sentences were going to come next. I wouldn't write another word down, and then I'd wait for the next day and start again, sort of with that confidence of knowing what was to come next. And I just started at the beginning and went through to the end, and that was very straightforward. But that is a rare phase that I've not been in again since. And then it really depends on what else is going on. If I'm in an editing phase, I really enjoy editing, so as many hours of the day as I possibly can have uninterrupted, I'll use them, whether they come early or late. If I'm trying to get words down on a page, I probably will set some sort of word count target, and I'll probably struggle to meet it. But I will do my utmost. I mean, it's very easy now because I'm not, I'm writing full time. But I do remember when I was starting to write and I was still working, I remember getting up at sort of 6 a.m. to fit in a few hours before work, and then sort of working through till midnight after work had finished. And it was really only possible because my now husband was doing a PhD in New York at the time, so there was nothing else going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do rely on, yes, your question was, how do you balance it around everything else? So my answer, I suppose, after all of that, is that balance doesn't really come into it. It's sort of extreme as much as possible, and then you sort of crash and burn and take some weeks to fulfill social obligations and get input, reading input, TV input, whatever.
You throw yourself into it, and do you believe in? You mentioned there, like in the breaks, sort of input as you call it, and watching TV and different bits and pieces. Do you believe that how important do you think that is, that idea of kind of refilling the creative well, as I've heard some people refer to it?
I think I'm not sure exactly what aspect of it is, whether it's going away and looking at other things, or whether it's just giving a project time to sit, both, in that folder on your computer and in the back of your brain. I think your subconscious can work out solutions to problems you've been grappling things. Sometimes it does it better when you're not focusing on it too hard, and sometimes it just needs a week or a month even. And the other benefit of taking the time out is when you come back to the manuscript, you can see it slightly differently. You're a month different of a person than you were when you left it. So you can, some things that were clear about it are hazy now, and you can see what's working and what's not. And I think that is quite important. Whether or not you actually get replenished creatively, I don't know, but you've got to also keep up with what's going on in the writing world. So you've got to input and see what other people are doing and steal some of their tactics.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you need the time to read.
Absolutely. What would you say is your favorite part of the process, and why?
Oh, definitely having written is better than
Yeah.
than writing in some
with,
ways.
I'm with you there. Yeah, it's nice to see the words on the page and
Absolutely,
kind of,
like, gosh, I did quite a lot. That's
yeah.
that's a lovely feeling. I do like editing. I do like tinkering with sentences. It can be painful, but sort of slowly going through and making sure that they flow and work better and do everything that I want them to do. I find that a much more engaging task than trying to work out what has to happen next.
And have you got a specific way that you approach your edit? Do you start with the structural things first? Do you edit as you go along, or do you just write completely unabashed and then go back to it?
I do, again, I keep saying this, it depends a little bit on the project, but I do generally do a little bit of editing as I go along. I would tend not to, not of the kind where, I know some people, I think maybe Zadie Smith says that she goes back to the start of the manuscript every time she opens it. I wouldn't do that, because then I know for myself I wouldn't make any progress, but I would sort of, in the course of writing a paragraph, go back and mess with it before moving on to the next one. I don't know if that counts as editing or if that's just writing.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think I try not to go back too far. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think for writing, trying to write regularly when you start at the start of a new project, mainly because if you give it a few days or a couple of weeks and you've not been on the manuscript, half the problem is remembering what was
you're
going
trying
on.
to do.
Yeah, and what the tone of it was and everything else. So you kind of find yourself rereading it anyway. But I often read the chapter or half a chapter or something that I've written the day before, and and as I'm doing that, I'll often find myself editing a little bit. I'll think, oh, I don't know why I've said that, or I can spot repetition and things like that just at a sentence level. So I kind of
I mean, there's no harm in fixing those things.
No, because they're going to
as
get
early
fixed.
as you can, because there'll be plenty more to fix later on.
Exactly, and they are, that they are going to be things that are going to get fixed or going to need to be fixed. I think that's the issue with it.
Yeah, definitely. When I get to then sort of the more official stage of editing, yes, I would do structural edits first, 100%, and then move on to line edits. Usually in all 1.5 books that I've written and one book that I'm writing now, the structural edits aren't too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to spend much more of my time line editing.
So when you were working on the offset, and you talked about, you kind of alluded to that experience that you got where an agent that you were looking at working with sort of gave you, it sounds like a major overhaul in terms of suggestions of what they wanted to kind of rewrite the whole book or whatever. When you got that email or you had that phone call or whatever form it took, how did you feel about that? I know that sounds like a stupid question, but
it's not at all a stupid question, and I think both my co-writer and I still are a bit bemused by the entire experience. And listen, it's no harm because it's all worked out well, and I think we did end up with a better novel for having gone through it. But it was so we'd written the book originally for a younger audience,
right,
which was possibly a mistake because the hook is at the age of 18, you get to pick one of your parents. You have to pick one of your parents to die as a carbon offset for your own life. So it is dark, it's grim. So we probably misjudged in trying to
even you say that, but like a lot of YA now is pretty,
it's very dark.
It's pretty dark, yeah.
So we'd sent it out to a lot of agents, and my co-writer has a phenomenal amount of hustle, so she was doing great things like notifying other agents once we've got a requests for full manuscripts, and there was a little bit of a excitement around that. And then this one agent asked if we would come and meet him in London. So we thought, gosh, why is he asking to meet us? He's not going to want us to come all this way if it's not to
I've heard this story, this type of story before as well,
right. So you know what's coming, which was that he didn't want to throw us a bone. He wanted to just sort of see who we were, I guess, and then ask us to rewrite it for an older audience. And that was sort of the extent of his feedback to us. He didn't give us any clearer guidance, which is maybe just as well, because the best of readers, even excellent agents, aren't necessarily so good at giving you solutions. All readers are great at pointing out problems, but they can't necessarily tell you how to fix them.
No, and I think that I think that about critique in general. I often say that to me. I think when I've been in critique groups and things, and you kind of get multiple people having an issue with the same bit or the same issue or whatever, but they can't fully articulate it. I always think, okay, well, I know that something's wrong with this, but it's up to me to I need to work out what it is, and also I need to work out the best solution that works with the rest of the book and what I'm trying to do.
That's I feel exactly the same way.
But you ended up doing so it was a total rewrite, was it?
So yes, a total rewrite. We agreed we'd send it to him, and then, which we did, going through that brutal process in that 1 week period at the end of all of that. And then we got an email a month after I think we sent it in, saying, "Oh, it's nice, but it's not really for me. I don't think I know where I would sell this."
Right.
Um,
So when you'd stopped swearing, what did you do?
so when we'd stopped swearing, I suppose I suppose we took stock and realized that we had a manuscript that we were both relatively pleased with all the same, that we'd put so much work into and that had dealt with the feedback that we'd got, not merely from that agent, but from the others we'd sub to as well, which was that it was too dark for a young audience. So now we had something that was dark with the same concept, but for an older audience that was atmospheric and that we were pleased with. So we just had a small breather and then started applying again, submitting to agents again. And that's how we met the lovely John Ash, who was at that time at Pew Literary. He's now moved to CAA, and I think was an exciting moment for me. It was actually, we met him just before the lockdown in March 2020, and I remember buying my flights over from Ireland with one of my first biggish story sales and thinking, yes, this is worked. I've got story money. I'm going to buy a ticket for a plane, go and meet an agent. And he signed us, and my co-writer and I went and bought some champagne and got very tipsy in King's Cross. And
then the pandemic
everything
hit.
sort of spiraled out of control from there.
No, that's great though. That must have been brilliant. So when you did the rewrite, and obviously it didn't work out with that agent, and you started resubmitting, did you find, was there like did you see sort of any difference in the feedback that you were getting? Were you getting better feedback? Did you find that people were coming back quicker? Did any of that change with the new version?
We got either silence from some people or positivity with no follow through, which is sort of hard to calibrate even now. But all you need is one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. So when you say positivity with no follow through, what is in that? They said did they ask for the full manuscript, but then nothing happened, or?
Yeah, some of it was that. Some of that we did get requests for full manuscripts, and we notified other agents that we'd sub to, sort of the same as the first time that had happened. And I think one of them, I can't remember who it was, but one of them wrote back and said, because we'd said, dear so and so, just to let you know our full manuscript has been requested, and he just wrote back and said, "I can see why!" exclamation mark. And we're thinking, all right, if you can see why, then request it too. Why don't you? Please, come on. But yeah, it's
such a funny, I just think it's a funny thing anyway, this whole thing where, you submit your manuscript, and if you're lucky, people will get back to you in 6 to 8 weeks or whatever, if you're sending it cold. But the caveat is always, but if somebody in the meantime asks to see all of it and they think that it might be quite good, do let me know, because then I'll put it up to the top of my reading pile.
I know, if someone else thinks it's decent, then I'll pay attention.
It's such a strange thing.
It is a strange thing. And listen, of course, the publishing industry gets things wrong. By various people's own admissions. There are people who ended up getting to market by non-traditional means who have done very well, like Andy Weir and Becky Chambers and Paul Kingsnorth.
And it's not an exact science.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And people, they've got their own deadlines and budgets to deal with, and they're just trying to do their best to work out what's going to work for the market, and they're not always going to get it right.
It's like William Goldman, the famous screenwriter, his saying was always, nobody knows anything. And I think that's pretty much the same with publishing or any arts-based business, really. There's nobody really knows what the next big thing's going to be. If they did, everybody would be signing them up,
Yeah, that's dead right.
It'd be dead cert every time. So as we kind of move to wrapping things up, what would you say has been the best piece of creative advice that you've been given along the way? What sticks out? It might have been something to do with writing. It might not have been. It might have just been something that's kind of helped you in your career, your wider career.
The first thing that springs to mind is And I can't remember who said it, but it was someone at Clarion West. And I can't remember whether they'd come up with it themselves or it was attributed to someone else. But the advice was, and maybe this is very well known, but it was, in your career, you can be good to work with, and you can be on time. Unless you are phenomenally good, you need to be at least two of these three things.
Yeah.
And I think that is useful advice. Because we spend so much time thinking about the manuscript and the craft itself, we don't necessarily think about the other aspects of it, that it is, hopefully you get to the point where it's your occupation, it's your profession, and you have to behave in a professional way. And you have to, just like you have to make sure that your manuscript is clean and you're not going to turn someone away for having the commas in the wrong places, you need to not turn people away for being an asshole or perpetually late or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, there are exceptions. There are geniuses who get to do those kind of things.
Yeah.
But who wants to be mean or slow?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And if you were starting again tomorrow, would you tell your younger self anything? Would you do anything differently? Do you think? Is there anything you'd tell your younger self?
I don't know. Possibly, on some days it would be, get started sooner, and on other days it would be just go and do some other job that allows you to read a lot because it'll be more stable, and you might have an easier time of it. But on the whole, no, I don't think so. I probably couldn't have got to this point without having gone through everything else that got to here.
Yeah. Everything happens for a reason, and you are where you are because of what's gone before.
Yes, exactly. And as my mother often likes to say, you never know when you're having a bad day.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it might seem horrible at the time, and it might lead to something much more spectacular later on.
That's true. That's very true. Well, that's great. Well, so just to wrap things up, why don't you remind people when Whether Violent or Natural is out, and also tell them where they can find out more about you online, etc.
Sure. So Whether Violent or Natural is out in the UK on the 11th of May, and it will be out in the States in June. And I'm not on social media because I'm a curmudgeon of the first order, but I do have a website. It's natashacalder.com, and there is a contact form if anyone really, really wants to get in touch.
They really, they will. There'll be people listening to this, Natasha. They will want to get in touch. Don't worry about that.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks.
That's great. Well, it's been great to talk to you, Natasha, and good luck with the book.
And you. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Joined up writing.
Thanks again to Natasha, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, other than me reminding you to make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you're getting your podcasts from these days. And that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time, and you won't miss a thing. And also remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because it really does help others to find the show, or, recommend it to one of your friends. That's it for this week, but thanks a lot for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.